The arrival of the Harrow papers. It was in the winter of 1834 that the first crate was found in the vestry cellar. Dust, wax, and the faint scent of salt water had preserved its contents almost perfectly. Welcome back. Before we continue, like, subscribe, share. The Harrow papers came to me by accident, or perhaps by design. Reverend Elias Harrow's descendants had long abandoned the parish, leaving behind only the churchyard and its leaning stones. I was cataloguing parish records for the county archive when the caretaker mentioned the sealed chest beneath the pulpit, a relic no one dared open since the last curate's death in 1902. Inside, bound with black cord, were 3 journals, a physician's ledger, and a small collection of preserved hair. The first journal begins in March of 1834 in the township of Dunmere, a quiet fishing settlement on the northern coast. Elias Harrow, recently appointed rector of St. Matthew's, had brought with him his wife, Agnes, and their 3 daughters, Lucille, Margaret, and Anne. The family had come from Norfolk, seeking distance from a scandal too delicate to name. His handwriting trembles even in the opening lines, deliberate, careful, as if aware that every word might one day stand as testimony. "I am not without faith," he writes. "Yet there are things within my household I cannot reconcile with Scripture nor with science. My youngest dreams in Latin, my eldest speaks to the reflection in the window long after dusk. By all accounts, Reverend Harrow was a man of reason." Before entering the clergy, he studied natural philosophy at King's College. His sermons, still preserved in the parish vault, reveal a preoccupation with the body, its mysteries, its transformations, its relation to the soul. Parishioners described him as gentle, though withdrawn, his wife as pale and ailing, and the daughters as oddly identical. Though they were born 3 years apart, the journals grow stranger by the page. He writes of a sound beneath the floorboards, of letters rearranging themselves in the family Bible, of Margaret's hand, which bore a mark not present at birth. Then, abruptly, a series of empty entries, 7 pages torn out, the fibers still ragged where they were removed. Dr. Jonathan Vale, whose signature appears in the accompanying ledger, seems to have been summoned in late June of that same year. His notes, written in clinical Latin, describe an hereditary affliction of a most unholy character, and physical symptoms inconsistent with any known malady. There is mention of experiments quiet, private, and unauthorized by the diocese. It was this mixture of faith and anatomy that would later define the Harrow case, a descent into something neither wholly spiritual nor entirely corporeal. "I was charged to heal them," Reverend Harrow writes in his final line of Part I. "But what if what ails them was born of my own blood? The mirror in the parlor, the first time it happened, the house itself seemed to hold its breath." By midsummer of 1834, the Harrow household had become the subject of whispered fascination in Dunmere. Parishioners noted how the Reverend's daughters no longer attended service, and how Mrs. Harrow's curtains were drawn even in daylight. The only visible sign of life came each evening when Elias himself lit a single lantern in the front window, the lone flicker of warmth in a house gone cold. From the second journal, dated July 3rd, his tone had shifted from anxious to desperate. He writes of sleepless nights, of a murmur beneath the hearth, and of Lucille, the eldest, who had begun to speak in her sleep not words, but sounds that belonged to no tongue known among men. He describes one particular evening when the family gathered in the parlor for supper. The mirror above the mantel, a grand, gilt-edged relic inherited from the previous rector, reflected them as it always had. But when Elias turned to fetch the salt, he saw movement still within the glass. His daughters remained motionless, yet their reflections shifted slightly, their eyes tracking him, even as their bodies sat still. It was not imagination, he insists. The glass knows when I look away. That night he covered the mirror with a sheet of muslin. By morning it had been torn down. None of the daughters confessed to touching it. The physician, Dr. Vale, visited again that week. His notes in the ledger are brief but chilling, hysterical episodes increasing. Eldest girl exhibits resistance to reflection, as if repelled by her own likeness. Middle child mutters fragments of Latin psalms while unconscious. Youngest bears discoloration at the base of the skull, resembling a birthmark in motion. Local gossip claimed the Reverend had resorted to exorcism, though the diocese found no such record. What is known through both parish archives and letters preserved in the Dunmere Historical Society is that by August, Elias Harrow stopped preaching altogether. His sermons ceased, his church stood empty, and the bell of St. Matthew's fell silent for the first time in 50 years. In one letter to his former tutor, found sealed and never sent, Elias confesses, "If evil resides in reflection, then sin begins with self-awareness. What I see in their eyes, it is my own gaze returned to me, sharpened, stripped of mercy." By early September, neighbors reported strange lights in the parsonage, blue glows seen through the attic windows, and sounds like whispering behind glass. One fisherman claimed to have seen Elias digging in the churchyard by lantern light. Another swore he saw 3 figures standing behind the Reverend, though no daughters were present in town by then. The second journal ends abruptly. The last line reads, "If the mirror remembers, then it is no longer a reflection, it is a doorway." The disappearance, September 17th, 1834. The rain had not stopped for 3 days, and neither had the knocking beneath the floorboards. When the parish clerk, Jonathan Bell, arrived that morning, the door to the Harrow house stood ajar. Inside, a damp wind moved through the hall as though the house itself were breathing. The dining table was still set for 4, candles long since melted into white pools. Upstairs, the beds of the 3 daughters were found unmade, their linens soaked as if carried from the river. But there were no footprints leading out, only the faint scent of oil and something metallic in the air. The Reverend was nowhere to be found. His writing desk was overturned, its drawers emptied. Among the scattered papers, Bell found a single scrap of parchment bearing the words, "They are not gone, they have gone inward." The investigation, if it can be called that, was led by the local magistrate, Mr. Hollis. His official report, preserved in the Dunmere archive, states that no signs of struggle or forced entry were present. The only anomaly noted was the mirror in the parlor, which was cracked from edge to edge, as though struck from within. Hollis ordered it removed, but when the glassworkers attempted to lift it, the reflection wavered. Each man later swore he saw faces beneath the surface, not their own, but pale, distorted impressions of the missing daughters, their mouths slightly open as if speaking from water. Within a week, the Harrow property was sealed. The townsfolk began to avoid the road entirely. Children crossed themselves when passing the old fence. And yet, strange occurrences multiplied, lights flickering in upper windows, faint singing heard at dusk from the churchyard, and once the tolling of the church bell, though no one had pulled the rope in months. A month later, a letter arrived at the rectory addressed to the diocese. It was unsigned, the handwriting erratic, but believed to be Elias's. The letter was later copied by a clerk before the original was lost to water damage. They asked me to look. I should never have looked. Their faces no longer belong to time. They speak from behind the veil, where mirrors turn inward, and glass remembers the shape of what it once reflected. I cannot tell which world is mine anymore, theirs or this one. Rumors spread that Elias had drowned himself in the Dunmere River, though no body was ever found. Others whispered he had followed his daughters through the glass. In the parish ledger, the final entry made by Bell reads only, Reverend Elias Harrow resigned by absence, presumed dead, October 3rd, 1834. After that, no one dared enter the Harrow house again. But travelers passing through Dunmere in the years that followed told stories of seeing figures in the windows, 3 women, pale and still, watching from behind the glass. The records of Dr. Vale, the human mind, once ruptured by grief, can give birth to things that should never have life. Notes of Dr. Thaddeus Vale, 1834, in November of 1834, 2 months after the Harrow disappearance, Dr. Thaddeus Vale of Charleston was commissioned by the Dunmere Parish Council to examine the abandoned rectory before it was sealed permanently. His medical notebooks, brittle with age, written in fine copperplate, survive in the local museum archives. The entries are clinical, detached, but a dread seeps through the margins. He begins by describing the parsonage as a place unnaturally cold, though the hearth still contained fresh ash, suggesting recent fire. In the study, Vale found streaks of soot running upward along the plaster, as though smoke had been drawn into the walls instead of away. Every mirror in the house had been veiled except one, the broken parlor glass, which no one had dared to remove. I approached it, Vale writes, and felt my pulse alter, my reflection appear to tremble in anticipation, like a patient before the surgeon's hand. He notes that the crack running across the mirror resembled a branching vein pulsing faintly under lamplight. When he touched it with the blunt end of his penknife, the glass quivered. Beneath the fracture, he claimed to see a milky film, as though condensation were forming on the far side. He heard a faint breathing. Dr. Vale's sketches, still preserved, depict 3 indistinct shapes pressed against the inner surface of the glass, one tall, one slight, one small. Their forms are labeled only as specimens H1, H2, H3. Vale also inspected the cellar, where he found a circle of chalk and salt, half washed by groundwater. In the center lay several pages from Reverend Harrow's final sermons, charred along the edges. One passage was underlined twice. The soul does not ascend when faith fails, it sinks to the nearest reflection of itself. In his concluding report to the parish, Dr. Vale recommended the rectory's destruction to prevent contagion of thought, but the council refused. They feared arson would draw attention and scandal to the church. Instead, they ordered the doors sealed with iron nails and the key buried beneath the altar at St. Matthew's. Privately, Vale continued his study. He wrote in his personal addendum found decades later in his Charleston home, "Whatever took root in that house has learned to imitate. It bears resemblance to the Harrow daughters, but it is not them. Its gestures are rehearsed, its voice is hollow. Reflection may be a doorway, yes, but a doorway opens both ways." Dr. Vale's handwriting falters near the end. The final line trails into a smudge, but the words remain legible enough to chill anyone who reads them. "I have boarded the mirrors in my own house, but at night I hear knocking from behind the glass." The Dunmere Inquest, 1835, the formal inquest into the Harrow family's disappearance, convened in March of 1835 under Magistrate Colin Marin, a man known for his rigid devotion to procedure and his disbelief in anything not bound by law or science. Yet even Marin's tone in the official record wavers a rare tremor of uncertainty. "Though I am not a man inclined to superstition," he writes in the opening minutes, "there is something unwell in that place, and in the hearts of those who speak of it." The proceedings were held in the town hall of Dunmere. 12 witnesses were summoned, among them the parish caretaker, 2 of the choir boys, Dr. Vale himself, and an aging woman named Lydia Rokesby, who had served as the Harrow family's housekeeper for 14 years. Her testimony is the most haunting. Lydia described the last Sunday service Reverend Harrow conducted the 7th of September, 1834. The church, she said, was unusually full. The Reverend appeared pale, his mouth dry as chalk, and his daughters sat silently in the front pew. They wore identical gray dresses, their hair plaited tightly, faces expressionless. He spoke not of faith, but of flesh. Lydia told the court, he said that the Lord does not reside above us, but beneath our own skin. Several parishioners fainted. One woman reported that during the final hymn, the eldest daughter, Clara, turned her head toward the window and whispered something, though the choir sang loudly enough to drown her words. Only Lydia heard the phrase clearly, "We are not leaving, Doctor." Vale presented his findings next. He produced fragments of the burnt sermon and his sketches of the mirror figures, though the magistrate ordered them removed from public record, labeling them manifest delusions. Still, Vale insisted these were not hallucinations nor reflections. They exhibited self-directed movement. At this, the inquest descended into unease. Reports from townsfolk followed strange lights at the rectory's upper windows, soft knocking from the bricked cellar, and the occasional cry of a child that seemed to echo through stone. Magistrate Marin's final report, dated April 3, 1835, ruled the case unresolved, likely familial derangement and collective suicide. The rectory, he ordered, was to remain sealed until such time as reason can explain what faith cannot. But his private journal, discovered posthumously, paints a different truth. A single entry dated 3 nights after the inquest reads, "I passed the old rectory returning from the mill. The upper window was lit, though no candle was ever placed there. In its glow stood 3 shadows holding hands. They turned their faces toward me. They smiled." That was the last record of Magistrate Marin. 2 days later, he was found drowned in the river behind his home. His pockets contained only a small silver crucifix and a shard of mirror wrapped in linen. The Anatomy of Faith, Dr. Vale's second study, 1836, Dr. Thaddeus Vale's second collection of writings, the Addenda Anatomica, 1836, was not meant for publication. It was found only after his death, bound in black calfskin and hidden behind a false panel in his study wall. The first page, water-stained and brittle, carries no date, only a single phrase written in Latin, fides perit in carne, faith perishes in the flesh. His earlier account had been clinical, but these notes read more like confession. He no longer writes as a physician dissecting illness, but as a man dissected by it. The Harrow phenomenon, he begins, presence as both contagion and inheritance. It passes through reflection and blood alike. Vale's experiments, if they can be called such, grew increasingly desperate. He acquired glass shards from the rectory site, taken secretly by a mason before the house was sealed. Under lantern light, he described seeing movement, within the fragments not reflections of himself, but of others. He documented them meticulously, faint outlines of young women, their faces wet, mouths slightly parted as if whispering from beneath water. He began a comparative study between these glass fragments and human tissue preserved in formalin, sketching both with identical precision. The resemblance disturbed him. Under sufficient magnification, he wrote, "The fibers of the human iris resemble fissures within fractured glass. The soul and its mirror may share a single architecture. Vale's next entries show a drift into obsession." He began testing his theory upon himself, staring into a polished surgical tray for extended hours, denying sleep, recording every alteration in his pulse and perception. By the 4th night, he noted, "My reflection has ceased to mimic me precisely. Its breath does not align with mine." On March 12, 1836, Vale describes awakening to find condensation on the inside of the tray's surface, as though someone were breathing out from behind it. He sealed the tray within a wooden chest, marking it with the initials H.D. for Harrow daughters. The next day, he attempted to destroy his samples with acid, but as he poured, the liquid failed to corrode the glass, instead forming iridescent veins across it, resembling frost. When he pressed his stethoscope to the fragments, he claimed to hear heartbeats. 3 distinct rhythms, they persist, he wrote, bound neither to time nor body. The daughters remain within the medium of their father's sin. His handwriting degenerates soon after, lines run together. Sentences lose their medical precision and grow prayer. Like frantic, God does not watch us from above, he watches us from behind the reflection. Perhaps he, too, is trying to get out. The final entry is dated April 1st, 1836. I have covered every mirror in my house. Still, something watches. I feel its breath at the back of my skull when I write. Beneath it, in darker ink, appear 3 wet fingerprints, small, delicate, unmistakably not his own. The sealed house of Dunmere, 1838 by 1838. Dunmere had learned to live with its silence. The rectory stood like a tomb at the end of Harrow Lane, its shutters nailed, its garden gone to rot. Ivy crawled over the windows like veins over a corpse. Children were warned not to wander near, though they often did, daring each other to knock once on the bolted door and listen. No one ever claimed to hear an answer until spring. That April, a group of laborers were sent to clear the surrounding orchard. One, a Welshman named Abel Rees, swore he saw movement inside the sealed house, not flickering, but steady, as if lamplight moved through the halls. When the men returned the next morning, the frost on the windows bore 3 clear handprints from within. The parish council dismissed it as mischief, but Dr. Vale's assistant, Jonathan Kells, the same who had once transcribed his mentor's anatomical notes, grew restless. He believed Vale's warnings were not delusion, but documentation. In secret, he petitioned the council for access to the rectory for purposes of sanitation and record. They refused. Kells entered anyway. His private account, found later among his belongings, describes the state of the house as strangely preserved. Dust lay thick upon the pews and stairwells, but beneath each window the boards were clean, as though someone had brushed them nightly from the other side. In the study, he found Vale's discarded stethoscope on the floor beside the shattered remains of a mirror. Embedded in the frame were strands of pale hair, human and recent. The house breathes, he wrote. I feel the timbers draw in air when I pause. The reflection lives even when the glass is gone. Kells descended to the cellar, where the chalk circle still lingered faintly under grime, but the symbols within had changed. The old sigils of protection, salt, ash, and scripture had been replaced by crude outlines of hands. Dozens of them, drawn with what appeared to be soot and animal blood, each pressed outward, each reaching. At the room's far end stood a wooden door he did not recognize. The parish plans never listed a chamber beyond. Its hinges were cold with condensation. On it was carved a verse not from Scripture, but from Reverend Harrow's last sermon. Faith is the mirror, break it, and see what stares back. Kells turned the latch. What follows in his journal is fragmented. Sentences repeat, degrade, collapse. He speaks of water and voices from the glass, of a sound like prayer recited backward. The final legible line reads, There were 3, and they knew my name. His body was found at dawn, lying in the orchard beside the sealed rectory, eyes wide open, lungs filled with water, though his throat bore no mark of drowning. The parish sealed the grounds again that night. They did not speak his name in church the following Sunday. The return of the reflection 1841 by 1841, Dunmere's rectory had become a local superstition, spoken of only in whispers, a landmark avoided even by crows. Yet that year, construction began on the new parish school less than 50 yards from the sealed house. The builders, most from outside the county, mocked the townsfolk's fear. To them, the Harrow story was an old wives' tale, the usual Gothic embroidery of rural England. The foreman, Charles Penman, recorded in his sight ledger that the first week passed without incident, save for the peculiar stillness of the soil. But on the 8th day, laborers unearthed fragments of glass near the foundations, old, warped, and veined with frost even in the mild air. Penman kept one shard as curiosity and placed it on his desk in the temporary office. That night, a boy from the village, Thomas Vale, nephew of the late Dr. Vale, was assigned to keep watch over the lumber. He later told the constable that he heard a knocking from inside the sealed house, slow and rhythmic, as though someone were tapping on glass. The sound ceased only when he turned toward the rectory door. He swore the upper window flickered then, briefly, revealing 3 pale figures looking out into the dark. The following morning, Penman's desk was found overturned. The glass shard had cracked neatly in half, and one of his gloves was missing. Work halted for 2 days, though the records show Penman resumed against protest. He claimed to hear his own name whispered in the clatter of tools, and one evening he saw his reflection in the window move a moment later than he did. "I have taken to covering the panes," he wrote, "yet even when the glass is hidden, I feel watched. It is as though something presses its face against the other side of the veil." 3 nights later, a thunderstorm struck Dunmere. Witnesses said lightning hit the rectory roof, blowing free part of the iron seal. Those who lived nearest swore they saw a brief glow from within, a cold blue shimmer like moonlight reflected through deep water. The next morning, the air in the village smelled of damp plaster and decay. Penman was gone. His boots remained neatly placed beside his cot, and the broken glass shard lay upon his pillow, wet as if just washed. In the weeks that followed, several townspeople reported strange reflections in their wash basins and window panes. Faces not their own, pale and distant, whispering in the voice of children. One girl refused to look into mirrors altogether, insisting that when she blinked, her reflection did not. The parish halted all construction. The school was never completed. The rectory was resealed under order of the diocese, and a cross of iron was driven into the ground before its door. Yet even after the walls were bricked anew, the villagers said they could hear faint laughter when rain touched the glass. "It's the daughters." An old woman whispered years later, "The storm set them free." The final sermon, 1843, in the spring of 1843, 9 years after the Harrow tragedy, the Diocese of Ely appointed a new rector to Dunmere, Father Alaric Dunn. Young, ambitious, and freshly returned from Cambridge, he considered the stories of the Harrow daughters a form of provincial hysteria. He announced he would reopen St. Matthew's Church for Easter Mass and, against every warning, hold the service facing the old rectory. He wished, he said, to turn fear into faith. The villagers gathered reluctantly on April 9th, under skies thick with rain. The new rector's sermon was to be delivered outdoors from a temporary pulpit raised in the churchyard. In his opening address, Father Dunn spoke of resurrection, of how no sin, no sorrow, no family is beyond the light of grace. Yet even as he spoke, several witnesses swore that the church's broken bell began to sway, though no wind moved the trees. Midway through the sermon, a sound echoed from the rectory. 3 dull strikes, slow and deliberate, like hands against glass. The congregation froze. Dunn continued speaking, his voice trembling only once. When he raised his hand to the sky, lightning flared, illuminating the rectory's upper window. For an instant, Those present saw the unmistakable outline of three figures standing side by side. They were not missed, testified Mrs. Lydia Rokesby, the former Harrow housekeeper. They were the girls, dressed as they were that last Sunday, only their eyes, oh, their eyes, were hollow, reflecting nothing. Dunn refused to yield. He turned toward the rectory, lifting his Bible high, declaring, "If evil dwells there, then it shall face the word." The final portion of his sermon survives in his own handwriting, discovered later among the scattered pages of his journal. I spoke, and the glass replied, not with words, but with faces pressing outward, pale and formless. The reflection of the congregation, each one of them, looked back at us from inside that house. We watched ourselves move within the mirror, delayed, reversed, as if time there ran the other way. The lightning struck again. The sound of shattering glass rippled through the churchyard. Witnesses fled, some falling to their knees, others screaming that the windows were breathing. When silence returned, Father Dunn was gone. His Bible lay open on the ground, its pages soaked, and ink bled into unreadable shapes. The rectory window stood bare, its inner frame smoking faintly, as if something had passed through it rather than broken it. In the weeks following, parishioners reported strange occurrences during morning prayers. Reflections in the baptismal font, rippling though the air was still, voices reciting scripture backward, and once, a child laughing from beneath the floorboards. The church was abandoned by midsummer. Father Dunn's body was never recovered, but on the last page of his journal, written in a hurried scrawl, was this line: "He was right. Faith is the mirror, and it does not like to be broken." The last reflection, 1847, and after by 1847, Dunmere was little more than a ghost parish. The fields were unworked, the church stood roofless, and ivy had sealed the rectory completely. What remained of its people avoided even speaking the Harrow name. Travelers passed through without stopping, remarking only on the strange stillness that hung in the air, a silence so thick it felt listening. When the diocese finally sent surveyors to reclaim the property that autumn, they found the rectory untouched by weather, though no one had tended it for over a decade. The glass of the upper window, long thought shattered, was somehow whole again. The surface was clearer than new pane, the report noted, yet it gave no reflection. Light entered, but none returned. Inside, the air was stale, metallic. Dust lay everywhere except on the mirrors. They were spotless, gleaming, and perfectly cold to the touch. On the parlor table rested a single object, a small, leather-bound Bible stamped with the initials A.D. in gold, Father Alaric Dunn's Bible. Between its pages they found 3 strands of pale hair and a folded note. "Do not let them see themselves." The men sealed the house once more, hammering boards across every window, save the largest, the one that refused to reflect. That night, one of the workmen, a young mason named Peter Hales, stayed behind to finish the iron nails. In his diary, discovered decades later in his family attic, he wrote, "I saw movement inside, a girl no more than 15 tapping on the glass. When I stepped closer, she smiled as though she knew me. Then 2 others appeared behind her. I turned to call for help, and they were outside in the glass behind me." Hales vanished that same evening. Only his hammer remained, rusted and warm to the touch. The Dunmere rectory was left to rot. By 1860, it had collapsed inward, leaving only the foundation and fragments of mirror glinting beneath the weeds. Locals claimed that when rain pooled in the ruins, faces appeared in the water, not of the Harrow daughters, but of those who looked too long. Even now, scholars debate whether the Harrow curse was madness, mass delusion, or something far older. The surviving journals of Reverend Elias Harrow suggest he had begun a series of theological experiments, attempts to materialize grace through reflection, to see the soul directly. Whether he succeeded or failed remains uncertain. Yet each year on the anniversary of his final sermon, Those who live near the old parish report the same thing, a brief glimmer at the edge of mirrors, as though something behind the glass were taking a breath. Some claim the fog forms 3 handprints before fading. Others say they hear faint voices reciting the Lord's Prayer backward. Faith is the mirror, Harrow wrote in his last sermon, and it remembers who has looked. So if you ever find yourself near Dunmere, and the night grows still enough for your own reflection to hesitate, don't wait for it to move again.